William Giblin was born, and apart from a few years spent in London as a child, bred in Oldham, an industrial town in the northwest of England. He served an apprenticeship to become an electrician, going on to work for a number of local companies and for many years at the Maple Mill, owned by Coldhurst. In 1948, the British government formulated the National Service Act, and from January the following year, healthy males aged between 17 and 21 were expected to serve in the armed forces for 18 months each. Due to British involvement in the Korean War, that period of service was increased to 2 years, and Bill would in due course find himself boarding a troopship for the Far East as a gunner in the Royal Artillery at the tender age of 18 years.
I was born on the 16th of July 1934 at Boundary Park Hospital, Oldham, and lived in the parish of Coldhurst. My dad was William Giblin, a railway man, and my mum was Ellen Giblin, who worked in the cotton mills and as an inspector of armaments during the war. Between the ages of 1 and 3, I lived with my mum in Oldham, while my dad took a job in London, working on the Overhead Electric Railway. A lot of families were separated in this way during those times. Work was scarce, and the effect of the big slump was still being felt. My dad did well in London and was given a railway cottage in Wembley. Me and my mum went down to join him in 1937. I was only 3, but I remember that he had bought all new furniture for us. I started school in Wembley, and my northern accent meant that I soon learned to look after myself.
Bill lived with his family in Wembley until February 1941, when he and his mother were evacuated back to Oldham due to the heavy bombing endured by the capital during the early years of World War II. William Sr. followed them shortly afterwards when he secured a railway job in Manchester after being prevented from joining up due to his reserved occupation.
I went through the rest of my schooling in Oldham, but failed the grammar school selection exam. It was a standard education for those days, and I left school at the age of 14 in 1949. I went to technical school and enrolled as a bound apprentice electrical engineer with the Manchester firm S. Dickinson. I turned 18 in 1952 and national service came along.
Bill was called up to serve in the Royal Regiment of Artillery, and his first port of call was Park Hall Camp near Oswestry in Shropshire. Here he went through initial training and was issued with uniforms and kit. By this time the British Army had already sustained casualties in Korea, where a United Nations force had been assembled to repel the Chinese-backed North Korean invasion of South Korea. At the ferocious 3-day Battle of the Imjin River, fought in April of 1951, the 1st Battalion of the Gloucestershire Regiment was outnumbered and surrounded by Chinese forces on Hill 235, subsequently known as Gloucester Hill. The regiment was awarded the United States Distinguished Unit Citation for their heroic stand against overwhelming enemy forces, but sustained considerable casualties, including young men conscripted into the regiment via national service.
My dad took me all the way to Oswestry after I received my call-up. He was a tough man, but there were tears in his eyes as we went our separate ways. It didn't bother me too much. I was only a kid really, just turned 18, and the thought of not coming home again didn't register too much. We were all put through selection testing during training, and I was assigned to radar on attack guns. They fired 56-pound shells. We trained at a camp in Wales as well. At Tom Fanner, before a passing out parade, I was sent to Germany where British forces had been stationed since the Second World War. Our camp was at Delmenhurst, near Brenham, and it wasn't a bad place to be. I enjoyed my time in Germany. Christmas 1952 was the first I'd spent away from home and family, but there would soon be an even greater distance between us.
In the new year of 1953, Bill was amongst those selected for service in Korea. The worst of the fighting was over, but the conflict was rumbling on into its 4th year. He was in good company though. Sir Michael Caine, then Private Maurice Joseph Micklewhite, had made the same journey from the British Army on the Rhine in Germany during the previous year.
In all honesty, I don't think I knew where Korea was. I remember I was given 14 days leave before we departed, but early in 1953 I was on my way to the Far East on SS Dunera. The journey would take 6 or 7 weeks, and we set out from Southampton we headed out through the Bay of Biscay and the Mediterranean. I remember that a lot of the lads suffered badly from seasickness, but I found my sea legs very quickly. There were plenty of eggs and bacon to be had from the galley, because not too many of us fancied eating. I was fine though, and made sure I got my share. The ship made plenty of stops. We weren't allowed ashore at Gibraltar or Malta. We did get a few hours on dry land at Port Said, but had to be careful because the locals were after home rule. When we arrived at Aden, it looked just like a scene from the Bible. I'd never set foot outside England before the army, and was suddenly seeing places I barely heard of. We stopped at Colombo in Sri Lanka, although we knew it then as Ceylon. Next it was Singapore, where we got a good chance to look round. The next port was Hong Kong, which was under British control in those days. We spent quite a bit of time there and got to see what it was like, all very strange to us. Kure in Japan was next. It was close to Hiroshima, where the atomic bomb had been dropped less than 8 years earlier. From there a ship named Isang. I remember it was built in Glasgow, took us to Busan in South Korea. I've seen Busan on the TV recently, and it's a modern city, but although it had never been captured by North Korean troops, it looked war-torn when we arrived.
Bill's eye-opening but gruelling journey continued on a troop train to Seoul, where the men were sent out to join different regiments. Assigned to Baker Troop, 12th Minden Battery of the 20th Field Regiment, Bill was already trained as a gun layer and was assigned to a 25-pound field piece.
It was the most beautiful gun that I'd ever seen, and although the war was drawing to a close, we did see some active service. I remember well how cold it was in winter and how sweltering during the summer. The people seemed to be very poor, and we were not allowed to fraternise with them. The Americans seemed much better equipped, paid and fed than us, so most of the lads weren't too fond of them. The UN forces included soldiers from quite a few countries, but by the summer of 1953 the war was over.
The Korean War ended in a military stalemate. The initial North Korean invasion of South Korea had been repelled after early successes for the North. A subsequent United Nations invasion of North Korea was not successful, nor was a Soviet North Korean attempt to invade the South again. The Korean Armistice Agreement brought the war to a close, and the now notorious demilitarised zone between North Korea and South Korea was established, remaining in place to this day. The United Nations forces lost a total of 178,426 men, with over 30,000 more missing in action. Over 500,000 were wounded during the conflict. The number of casualties on the North Korean, Chinese and Soviet side numbered over 750,000 dead and a similar number wounded. Almost 15,000 British military personnel served during the Korean War, with 1,109 killed, 2,674 wounded, 179 missing in action and 977 taken prisoner of war. These figures outweigh the casualties sustained by the British Army in Northern Ireland, the Falklands War and the Gulf War, yet all are far more prominent in the consciousness of the British people. Like the Burma conflict in the Second World War, some Korean veterans refer to their war as being forgotten.
Even though the war was finished, the peace agreement was viewed as being uneasy, so the United Nations maintained a force in South Korea. I was there until February 1955, before I sailed back to Hong Kong. By that time, I'd been away from home for the best part of 3 years. I don't think too many of the lads serving in the army these days have to be away for that long. I wasn't the type to fret about that, and I made some good friends in the army, but it was difficult for some of the lads. Of course, some of them didn't make it back home. From Hong Kong, I had a few periods of leave near Tokyo, and they were great experiences.
Despite the long absence from home, the occasional moments of danger, and the privations of life with the Royal Artillery on active service, Bill has largely fond memories of his National Service days. He returned home to Oldham in 1955 to resume his trade, but over recent years he has thought more often of his army days. Here we see his collection of medals, recently acquired and now displayed for posterity. The accompanying picture shows him on the station platform at Tom Fanner in Wales, where part of his training took place, and he's wearing a blazer complete with the Royal Artillery crest. The medals are, from left to right and in order of prominence, the British Army Service in Korea Medal, the United Nations Service in Korea Medal, the Queen's Coronation Medal, the National Service Medal, then medals for service in Hong Kong, Germany and the Cold War.
One of my fondest memories of my time in Korea goes back to the Christmas of 1953. I was on guard duty on Christmas Day, about half a mile outside of our camp. Looking down the valley from Kamaksan towards the Imjin River, I could hear the rest of the lads singing carols. The moon was out and it had started to snow. I could see the oil lamps and the candles. That were the only form of lighting most of our lads had. It was a beautiful, peaceful scene, to be honest, but afterwards I put my electrical training to some use. I did some wiring from the generators, hooking up to the tents. Lo and behold, we had electric lights. Unfortunately, there was nothing we could do about the food. I think Christmas dinner that year was corned beef and biscuits. Of course, the officers fared a bit better. They had a Nissen hut, and I got roped in to sort out some of the electrics in it. The spells of leave in Japan also stick in my memory. You got 7 days at a time and could get stuck into the good food provided by the Yanks.
The thought of 18-year-old lads being plucked from their families and sent halfway around the world to fight for their country seems an alien one to young people today. Conscription via national service came to an end in 1960, and neither of Bill's 2 younger brothers were called upon. For some, the memories are generally good. Whole terms could be served without leaving British shores, and useful skills and trades could be picked up. Others were sent to fight in conflicts such as Korea, Malaya, the Cyprus emergency, and in Kenya for the Mau Mau uprising. Those campaigns took their toll in terms of casualties for both conscripted and regular servicemen, with others suffering accidents during training and exercises. Strangely, and despite 2 million men being conscripted in total, the idea of national service has become almost erased from the national memory. Most histories tend to refer to it as a footnote, yet without them the British Army might well have struggled to maintain its military influence after the Second World War, and the retreat from empire could well have become shambolic as a result. In the end though, they were kids, fresh from school or apprenticeships, and some paid the ultimate price for their service to the country.